As global attention continues to focus on the escalating tensions between China and Japan, a growing question looms over the security of East Asia. Could a war break out between these two regional giants? Is the United States the main instigator, or are there deeper, more localized forces driving the conflict? To understand the gravity of the situation, we must look at the underlying events that have brought both nations to this precarious point. Japan's recent shift in foreign policy has caught the international community by surprise. Since her appointment as Prime Minister in October 2025, Minister Takaichi has steered Japan's defense posture toward a more assertive stance, especially regarding Taiwan. During a parliamentary session in early November, Takaichi made a bold statement that drew immediate reaction from Beijing. She declared that any Chinese attempt to militarily subdue Taiwan would be regarded as an existential threat to Japan. If China were to take aggressive actions towards Taiwan, it would be a situation in which Japan's survival would be directly threatened, Takaichi said, marking a significant departure from Japan's traditionally pacifist defense policies. This stark shift aligns with Japan's interpretation of its collective self-defense obligations under international law. For many analysts, this was more than just a statement of policy. It was a clear signal that Japan would not remain passive if Taiwan were to face a military assault by China. Tokyo's recent embrace of a more proactive defense strategy, particularly in the face of a growing Chinese military presence in the Taiwan Strait, represents a significant pivot from the post-Doi stance of non-aggression. Beijing, unsurprisingly, did not take kindly to Takaichi's remarks. The Chinese government, already sensitive to foreign interference in Taiwan, immediately reacted with diplomatic fury. On November 22, 2025, China escalated the issue by formally lodging a complaint with the United Nations, accusing Japan of preparing for intervention in Taiwan's affairs. In its letter to the UN, China's ambassador to the UN, Fu Kong, warned that any Japanese military involvement in Taiwan would be regarded as an act of aggression. Japan's actions are not only unprovoked, but also an infringement on China's sovereignty, Fu said, accusing Tokyo of violating international law and undermining regional peace. The Chinese government insisted that Taiwan is an integral part of China and that no foreign country had the right to interfere. The Chinese rhetoric underscored the gravity of the situation, with Beijing reaffirming its stance that Taiwan must remain under Chinese control. The language used by Chinese diplomats was not just accusatory, it was a direct warning, signaling that China would view any intervention by Japan as a major escalation in the region. Japan's response was swift and resolute. Prime Minister Takaichi's government dismissed the accusations as baseless. In a statement from Japan's UN ambassador, Kazuyuki Yamazaki, Tokyo rejected the allegations outright. The claims made by China are inconsistent with the facts and unsubstantiated, Yamazaki stated. He reinforced that Japan's defense posture remained passive and in line with its post-Wabutaifu constitution, which strictly limits military action to self-defense and peacekeeping operations. Yamazaki also reiterated Japan's commitment to upholding international law, but clarified that Japan would not stand idly by in the face of a major regional threat. Japan's growing military capabilities, particularly its missile defense systems and security partnerships with the United States, have been key elements in this evolving stance. The Japanese government maintained that it was only responding to external threats in line with its constitutional obligations. Despite these reassurances, the diplomatic rift between China and Japan deepened. Tokyo's continued insistence on strengthening its defense posture, particularly in relation to Taiwan, was seen by Beijing as a challenge to its sovereignty, one that could trigger broader regional instability. As the diplomatic standoff between China and Japan deepened, the economic fallout began to surface. China, wielding its significant economic influence, imposed a series of sanctions and countermeasures aimed at Japan. Chinese authorities suspended several cultural exchanges, including the release of Japanese films and performances in China, signaling Beijing's growing frustration with Japan's hardening position. Trade between the two countries, already fraught with tension over tariffs and economic competition, was further strained. Chinese authorities scrutinized Japanese exports, particularly in sectors like technology and agriculture, causing delays and disruptions in shipments. Japan, heavily reliant on Chinese manufacturing and consumption, felt the economic squeeze. As China's second-largest trading partner, Japan could ill afford to lose access to Chinese markets, making the economic sanctions a painful blow to businesses on both sides of the conflict. In a further escalation, China issued a travel advisory warning its citizens against visiting Japan. The safety of Chinese citizens in Japan has become a growing concern, said a spokesperson for China's foreign ministry, citing alleged incidents of discrimination and mistreatment of Chinese nationals in Japan. This warning had a noticeable effect on the tourism industry, with Chinese tourists accounting for a substantial portion of Japan's inbound visitors. The travel advisory, while not directly military in nature, sent a clear signal of China's displeasure. Amid this escalating confrontation, the role of the United States cannot be overlooked. Washington, a longtime ally of Japan, has been closely watching the tensions between Tokyo and Beijing. Japan's deepening military ties with the US have become a major point of contention in China's assessment of Japan's intentions. Some analysts argue that the United States is indirectly fueling tensions by bolstering Japan's defense capabilities. Under the US-Japan Security Pact, the United States is obligated to come to Japan's defense in the event of an armed attack. This treaty has provided Japan with a security umbrella, but it has also made Tokyo a target for Chinese suspicion. The US has also been vocal in its support for Taiwan, routinely conducting freedom of navigation operations in the Taiwan Strait and selling military equipment to the island. For China, these actions represent a direct challenge to its territorial claims and its growing assertiveness in the region. As Japan aligns itself more closely with US security interests, Beijing views it as part of a broader American strategy to encircle and contain China, a strategy that Beijing is unwilling to tolerate. Washington, for its part, has called for de-escalation between the two powers. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken recently emphasized that both China and Japan must exercise restraint, particularly in the military realm. The US has made it clear that it does not wish for a military conflict to break out in East Asia, but has also reaffirmed its commitment to Taiwan's security, further complicating the situation. The tensions between China and Japan represent a significant shift in East Asian security dynamics. For decades, Japan has maintained a policy of passive defense, relying on its alliance with the United States for protection while avoiding direct involvement in regional military conflicts. However, with the rise of China as a regional superpower and the increasing threat to Taiwan's security, Japan is reassessing its role in the region. Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks on Taiwan are part of a broader trend in Japan toward greater defense autonomy and a more assertive posture in regional affairs. Japan's increasing military spending, coupled with growing cooperation with the US, signals a departure from its post-war pacifist stance. This shift is not without risk, as it places Japan in a direct confrontation with China's territorial ambitions. For Beijing, the growing militarization of Japan and its increased alignment with US interests is a direct challenge. The Chinese government sees Taiwan as a red line, and any foreign interference, particularly from Japan, is unacceptable. China's response to Japan's growing military capabilities will likely continue to be both diplomatic and economic, as Beijing seeks to maintain its influence in the region. The immediate future of Japan-China relations hinges on several key factors. First, Japan's defense posture will likely continue to evolve as the threat from China intensifies. The Japanese government will need to balance its military ambitions with its economic ties to China, a delicate and potentially dangerous juggling act. Second, the role of the United States in this conflict will be crucial. Washington's position on Taiwan and its continued support for Japan's defense will undoubtedly influence the trajectory of the crisis. However, the US also faces the challenge of managing relations with both Japan and China without stoking further tensions. Finally, the diplomatic fallout between China and Japan will likely have long-lasting consequences for the entire Indo-Pacific region. If the two nations cannot find a way to de-escalate, the risk of military conflict, or at the very least a prolonged period of economic and diplomatic strife, remains high. The actions of both Japan and China in the coming months will shape the future of East Asian security for years to come. In conclusion, while the possibility of war between China and Japan may still seem remote, the escalating tensions and shifting security dynamics are undeniable. The role of the US and the broader international community in managing this crisis will be pivotal in preventing the situation from spiraling into an uncontrollable conflict. However, the world is watching closely as the situation unfolds and the stakes have never been higher.